Hey Senpai, it's your Kohai, and I'm back with another in-depth review. Today we have a very exciting review because it's our first review from a highly anticipated company. This is going to be a two-part review with Succubus Lulumu and Konata from BearPanda. We'll use these two figures to determine whether or not BearPanda is really worth your money or not. For those of you that don't know, BearPanda is a Chinese company that is trying to break into the figure market. These are the first two figures they have manufactured by themselves, since in the past they have only done collaborations. Konata being their first, followed by the Succubus Lulumu. Because they are a Chinese company, they are able to offer these figures at a significantly lower price point than their Japanese competitors. We need to keep in mind though that these prices are used to break into the figure market and purposefully undercut the Japanese companies. So it'll be interesting to see, assuming we continue collecting BearPanda, how the value of their price program will change over time. In our opinion, having Chinese companies that properly license their figures into the market is a great thing for this hobby, especially if their quality can get close to that of their Japanese counterparts. And the reason for this is simple: it creates competition. If the Chinese figures can get close to the quality of the Japanese ones, this will force the Japanese to re-strategize in some manner. Number one, they lower their cost to remain competitive. Number two, the price stays the same, but they increase their quality to make the price worthwhile. Or number three, the best case scenario, they lower their price and increase the quality to remain competitive against the Chinese. Competition is great for consumers, and it will be a positive for this hobby as long as the Chinese companies properly license their figures to support the original IPs. Some Chinese companies have already found a place in the market and are respected, such as MyEthos and HobbyMax, but their prices have slowly crept up close to the Japanese price point. And within the past 2 years, we have more Chinese companies trying to break into the market, such as Apex, Animester, Enso Toys, Max Cute, and BearPanda. Now, if you're having a hard time figuring out which Chinese companies to support, there's an easy trick to this. If it's on sale on AmiAmi, it's going to be licensed. Now, that being said, we can't attest to the quality until people start posting pictures or review videos. That's why today we're going to be taking a look at both of BearPanda's unique figures in order to see their quality thus far. We will start with Lulumu and move on to Konata. For Konata, we will be doing a full scoring, but for her review, we will make it more succinct since there are many other reviews out there for her already. Starting with Lulumu, she is an original character illustrated by Kodama, and this is a 1/6 scale with an MSRP of 7,150 yen. The Japanese spell her name rurumu, but that's because they do not have the L sound in their language. The author has stated that she is born of Lilith and named after an unnamed flower, which we can only assume is a lily. But this is why you might see her name translated in the doujin to Lulumu or Lulum with the U rolled off, which is very common in the Japanese language. For the sake of this video, we will refer to her as Lulumu, but this is why you might see companies use these names interchangeably for the same character. Since she is an original character, we like to give a little bit of a backstory. Hers is a really simple one where one day she just shows up in this dude's room and decides to take him on as her single human host. Her lore is that she is a succubus born from plants, and she has inherited the flower's ability to secrete nectar from her breast, which just happens to be an aphrodisiac. They want their host to be in a relaxed state at all times, and she also just doesn't have any friends, so she does all of the house chores for him. In summary, cute little succubus takes care of her human host. Or if you want to look at the darker side, she keeps him in a drug state of euphoria at all times and does everything for him, so he has no choice but to be her meal at any time that she wants. All in all, not a bad gig. So with that, let's take a look at the box. Starting with the box, we have more of a contemporary design, which seems very simple, but there's actually a decent amount of complexity to it. For the background, we have a textured background versus a solid color. On the back, we have a faded picture of the artwork, and on the front, we have a picture of the figure, as well as this glossy border here, and it's also on top. For the box, they refer to her as rurumu, whereas on the AmiAmi listing, she is Lulumu, so just another example of this disparity. On the side, we have a glossy imprint of the BearPanda logo, which I do think is very cool. And this box is different because you don't open it from the top, you actually open it from the side. Once we open it up, we have a few little hidden details. On the front, we just have some information about the figure, as well as her name. And when we turn it to the side here, we have a nice little glossy logo of the artwork. Here's the first layer of inner packaging. To start things off, she is 10¼ inches tall, or about 26 centimeters. Initial impressions are, from what I can see here, we're definitely getting a lot of value for our money. I really feel like I'm just looking at another scale figure, and she can definitely hold her own against the other Lulumu figures, which you'll see here on my left. There are only about 3 elements of shading on this figure, but they did make some smart choices in order to get clean lines. Really, the only thing that I'm disappointed in is the base, and it's because it's just a basic plastic base, but it's at least a little bit better from some of the freeing bases that we see on bunnies, which are just basic white plastic bases, because at least this has some sloping, so it has some geometry to it. And even with all of that, we also get an alternate face with the follow me eyes, which personally I feel like are kind of creepy, but at least it has an alternate expression, so it just gives us more value for our money. So with that, let's take a closer look at the paint. Starting with the hair, the base coat is pink, and then they have added shading with 3 airbrushes of white to give highlights. Here on the front of the bangs, on the back of her head, and here on the tips. For her hair accessories, they've used a metallic purple color with black airbrushing on top. For the face, her eye decals are set nicely, and there is actually a little bit of blush, although I would have liked to have seen more. The mouth is slightly open, and it is painted on the inside. For the alternate face, everything is exactly the same, except both eyes are open, and they are 3D, so it gives the illusion of them following you. While her body has no shading, they did use a nice soft matte finish, so her skin does feel good. All of her clothing pieces are added back in, so they were able to create clean lines. The only paint bleeding that I see is on the top of the baby bottle here. There's not a lot of detailing in the paint because there's no shading, but they did choose a really pretty metallic red for all of the ribbons and bows, except for the bow on the front of her bottoms, which they chose to use a matte red. Not really sure why, because the metallic red just looks so much better. Even her shoes are a nice glossy red. Her lingerie and stockings have a pearlescent cream color, and this gives the stockings a sheer effect, so you have the illusion of seeing her skin underneath. Her fingernails are painted a glossy color, and they added line detailing onto the baby bottle, which is a nice touch. Her tail is a metallic purple with black airbrushing on top, and on the heart with the tip fading to red. The pillow that she's standing on has a purple pearlescent paint that actually does have shading in the stitching of the fringe here. The fringe is a yellowy gold color that reflects that purple paint, giving it an almost iridescent effect. The star decals are once again clean, and they are actually under that metallic clear coat, and so that also gives them a sparkly effect. The plastic base itself is not actually painted, it's just the color of the plastic. A unique feature about this paint is that the paint for the bra is supposed to be thermoreactive so that when it heats up, it turns translucent, giving it the illusion of sheer lingerie. This is listed in the Ami description as well as the Chinese promotionals. However, interestingly enough, it is not mentioned anywhere on the box nor on the instructions provided. We've already tested this against a Lulumu that we already own, and the difference was so negligible. I thought I saw a small change. Senpai said he didn't see any change. People on HPOI, some of them say they have a change, some of them don't see a change. So we decided to reach out to Ami to see if this was still even a feature. And here is Ami's response. Essentially, they told us to go watch someone else's review to figure out how to do it. Maybe there are more options in other languages, but at the time of this review, there was only one English review, and they don't even mention this feature. Ami, you blew off the wrong people, because we'll be that review for you and tell you exactly how it doesn't work. And to do so, we have a control Lulumu, a heat gun, and a very expensive thermal imaging camera. So be prepared, Ami. You gave me a half-assed response, but I'm going to give you a full-blown science experiment, and I'm going to point people to my own video and show them how it doesn't work. This experiment will be simple. We have a control Lulumu that we will not heat, and we have an experimental Lulumu that we will heat. Then we will take a thermal imaging pic and a regular photo and compare the two figures to see if there is a change. For experiment 1, we are going to heat her by touch. If this is supposed to be a play feature, then the method of heating needs to be feasible. People would be willing to heat via touch, but they're not going to want to dunk their figures in hot water or use a heat gun or hairdryer to see this change. If this experiment does not work, then we can already deem this as not being a feature, but we will go ahead and step it up a level by using our heat gun. I'm going to start by fondling poor little Lulumu here, and Senpai is going to take the photos. We finished Experiment 1, and you can see the results for yourself up on the screen. As you can see, there is no change between the two, and so this is not a feasible play feature. So we're going to go ahead and step it up to our heat gun. Now that we finished Experiment 2, you can see the results on screen for yourself. Once again, we don't see a significant change. With touch, we were able to heat her bra 10 degrees above ambient, and with the heat gun, 40 degrees above ambient, which is higher than your body temperature, so I think we gave it a fair shot. I think what's really telling here is that it's not mentioned anywhere in the instructions, so I don't think it even made it through production. Even if we were to say it worked, there's not a drastic change between a white to a slightly creamier white to appear translucent. So I think people are just convincing themselves that they're seeing a change. BearPanda's new Lulumu figure also mentions a heat transitioning paint, but this time with the tails transitioning from black to a red and a purple. And I hope this time it actually works, because if not, then their tails are just going to be black all the time. So with that, let's move on to modeling. For the hair, I'm pretty impressed with the modeling. It's on par with many of the scales that we own, and in particular, they did a really good job with the detail on the front of her bangs. They also did a really nice job of adding a lot of movement into the hair and hiding the seams. We do see a seam between the bangs and the back of the head, but that makes sense since we have to take off the bangs to switch to the alternate face. And then due to fitment issues, we have a little bit of a seam on both of her pigtails where they fit into the head. And the only piece of hair that I see added back in is on her right tuft here. The mouth on the face is modeled in slightly, but the lips and the opening are not super detailed, and so it's just a little triangle. For the alternate face, they did a 3D modeling of her eyes, and I think it does look realistic. And then this character has elf-like ears, and so they actually modeled in what that cartilage would look like on the inside. The reason why the paint looks so good is because they were able to paint all of these pieces separately, but then they had to add them back in. So this leads to modeling issues, and the finesse just isn't there. From what we can see, the sculpt looks really good, and it's on par with a normal scale figure, but where it lacks is the final execution of the product. The back of the hair fits a little bit too loosely with the bangs, and so it falls off very easily, as well as the front bangs falling off depending on what angle you hold her at. The pigtails are hard to put in because they're in plastic pegs, and so is the tail because you have to put the tail on first and then the hair on, and you have to try to fit it in these slots, and the tail just wants to fall off. The worst seam you can't see unless you're being a degenerate, and let's be honest, you know you looked, is where the leg meets the labia majora. There are a couple seams around the ribbon, here and here, and you can definitely tell where the strap and her breast piece are two separate pieces. I will say it is impressive that they were able to model a single piece that wraps around her entire body, but the tail doesn't quite sit in the ribbon where it's supposed to if we're trying to follow the artwork. There is some glue around the top of her breast piece here, and the bottoms look like they're cast off because there's a seam between the bottom and the frills, but unfortunately they're not. The modeling of the body looks really good, especially on her cute little stomach here. They took the time to model in the collarbones and the little chip of her thigh spilling out of her stockings. They also modeled her fingers with little indentions for her fingernails. The baby bottle is an interesting piece because the milk section is actually free floating, and so you can turn her upside down and it will move. For the pillow, we have a realistic indention of where she's stepping into it, but there is a little bit of flashing on the frills. The face is extremely cute, and they did a really good job on her eye decals. The eyes look like they're straight from the doujin, and they really give her a lot of life. The follow me eyes I feel like are just a preference and a unique gimmick. You either like them or you don't. The 3D clear gloss makes the eyes darker, which doesn't match the pastel palette of the doujin, and I also just personally find them creepy because they're more recessed in the head than normal eyes would. They're also hidden by the bangs, and so I don't feel like they achieved the effect they were going for. The base is very drab compared to the rest of the figure. The pillow is very cute, but the addition of a grayish lavender disc underneath definitely leaves more to be desired. There are plenty of very beautiful metallic and pearlescent paints that they could have chosen from to use that would have looked a lot better, or they could have used a fluffy material to give the illusion of a bedroom. She does come affixed to the base, so you cannot remove her, which increases the risk of her arriving broken, and you should take extra care when handling her. The pose is very cute, and they've given it a lot of movement with the flow of her hair, the crinkles in the ribbon, and the indentation in the pillow. She's also pushing her breasts forward with her arms and striking a very cute chew pose, which makes me swoon. This figure is based off of an artwork, which I have here. There is a 3D art card pre-order bonus, which we unfortunately do not own because we got her through AmiAmi, but we did this because we've had very bad experiences pre-ordering through Chinese websites. Overall, the figure matches the artwork extremely well with a few minor differences. Obviously, we do not have all of this background here, but this would have required the figure to be more of a diorama, and so we won't count off for that. In the artwork, her bra is translucent, but as we found out during our experiment, unfortunately the figure cannot recreate this. Another detail that I'm disappointed they didn't add, it's a very small detail, but I think it's important, is that her arms are squeezing her breasts, which is actually squeezing a little bit of milk out of the top of the baby bottle, but they have not recreated this here. Unfortunately, it feels like they turned a PG-13 image into a PG figure. This figure is extremely kawaii. It feels like Lulumu has come straight out of the doujin. It's also slightly lewd because she's wearing lingerie and sheer tights. It's just such a shame that the color change didn't work. At first I thought the baby bottle was really weird because I thought she was the baby, but then I read through the doujins and realized it's a reference to the nectar that comes out of her breast, and so it made it slightly less weird. Now you're the baby. Not my fetish, but if you like mommy milk, then this figure is definitely for you. With that, let's give her a score. Starting with the box, there's actually a lot of attention to detail here. There's some really nice design elements, such as the foil logo and lettering, and it's unique because it opens from the side, so it gets a 4 out of 5. Moving on to production, starting with the paint, they were able to create many clean lines because the pieces were painted separately, and this is definitely comparable to your average scale figure. However, there is not a lot of shading or dark wash, and they also advertised the thermoreactive paint, but this did not achieve the effect as intended, so it gets a slightly below average score of 7 out of 15. For modeling, the sculpt is excellent, but the execution is what hinders it, such as fitment, glue, and flashing, so it gets a slightly below average score of 7 out of 15. For the base, it's most certainly a step up from average. The pillow is well executed, but the grayish lavender base leaves a lot to be desired, so it gets a 6 out of 10. Moving on to artistry, under Art versus Model, the figure matches the artwork extremely well with only a couple minor differences, these being the translucent bra and the milk coming out of the baby bottle, so it gets a 9 out of 10. The pose is very cute, and they have actually added a lot of movement with the hair, ribbons, and her stepping into the pillow, but her body can feel ever so slightly stiff, so I'll give it a 9 out of 10. The face matches the doujin's color palette very well, but it could have benefited from more blush, so it gets a 9 out of 10. For Moe, this figure is extremely cute and slightly lewd, but unfortunately not as lewd as the source material, so it gets a 9 out of 10. Moving on to value, objectively this figure costs 7,150 yen and weighs 354 grams, giving her a price per gram of 20.2, which just barely misses the 5 mark, giving her a 4 out of 5. Subjectively though, this feels like an absolute steal for average scale figure quality at 7,150 yen, so I'm going to give her a 5 out of 5. For playability and displayability, it does come with an extra face, and the figure doesn't take up a large footprint, so I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5. This brings the total for BearPanda's Lulumu to a 73 out of 100. This puts her in 6th place out of all the figures we reviewed, making her a very strong contender. But before we give you our final thoughts, let's move on to BearPanda's 1/4 scale Konata. Now it's time for BearPanda's first solo figure. This is the 1/4 scale Konata bunny figure from the story of a manga artist who was imprisoned by a strange high school girl. Now, as we stated earlier, we will quickly move through her review as there are others out there, but we still like to go ahead and give a little backstory. To start us off, we have a manga artist who has one successful series, but he's struggling to publish his second one. He moves to another city to get closer to his editor, but all of a sudden one day, he passes out from hunger. He wakes up to find himself in a dark room, chained up, with a drawing tablet, and comes to find out he's been kidnapped by a masked high school girl. This girl is a quiet antagonist and keeps her intentions close to her heart, but we can only assume that she's a really big fan since she really just wants to see him succeed and really adores him. She does this by making meals for him every day and even posing as inspiration to help him get over his artist block. As weird as this sounds, the story ends up being really sweet as the relationship develops between the two because the manga he ends up creating is about the story of him being kidnapped by her. It's surprisingly a wholesome story considering it's an ecchi series, and it's a very short manga series that you can read in less than an hour because unfortunately it's unfinished. I can still recommend reading this series though, because at least where it stops has a satisfying lewd ending. And if you're left wanting more, there are 2 additional official 18+ doujins from the artist. It's always really satisfying when a series has official 18+ content, because it's like you're seeing the character nude for real instead of just an interpretation. With that, let's take a look at the box. We're greeted with similar design language, although there are no glossy elements. We still have a texture background and lots of borders. On the front, we have a portrait of the figure's face, probably due to how lewd she is. On the side, we have Rabbit Hutch, not really sure what that means. Maybe it's the name of their bunny line. On the back, we have additional information as well as a small picture of the figure. And this box is unique because this is actually a slipcover that we can remove to reveal and insert with a picture of the artwork. Here's the first layer of inner packaging. This figure stands tall at 18¼ inches or about 43.5 centimeters. Initial impressions, honestly, I'm pretty disappointed, particularly with how successful Lulumu was. Starting with the base, she is permanently attached just like Lulumu, but this base is not flat, and so she is very wobbly. Moving to her leg, we can see a dye stain from her tights. Looking at all of the gloss black elements, it's extremely hard to see on camera, but there are several scuffs and many tiny scratches in the finish. We can also see a large glue bubble here, which is the largest I've seen on any of the figures that we own. For her skin, she does not have that nice soft matte finish, and so it is a very rough texture. You can see a lot of scuffs, and it just looks very plasticky. The strongest part of this figure is actually the face. I do think the follow me eyes work for this scale. There's not a lot of shading in her hair, but what's there does look good. This figure also comes with an alternate face that basically ditches the follow me eyes and gives her a smiling expression. There's also a mask provided for each face, although it's extremely hard to get them to stay in place. Under this mask, she is sticking out her tongue, and we will keep this mask off while we take a closer look at the paint. Starting with the hair, they used a dark brown base with red highlights. They hit the outside bottom, inside bottom, and bangs. This is the only place on the figure that has shading. For her face, the eyes are set nicely. She has little bags under her eyes, and the mouth is actually very detailed. They use matte colors for the inside of her mouth and teeth, and a glossy paint for the tongue. Fun fact, she never makes this face in the manga. This is only for the illustrations and doujins, so you can probably guess what she's wanting. The earrings do look good, with only a little bit of paint bleeding on the top. The black clothing, as with any bunny figure that we own, has no shading, and it's unfortunate that there are so many scratches and scuffs. The only thing keeping her from being freeing quality is that she doesn't have that nice soft matte finish on her skin, since all the freeing figures only have shading in the hair, which is the same for her, but they have that nice soft matte finish. Looking at her feet, we can see that her toenails are painted with a glossy color, and this is the only bunny figure that we own that doesn't have heels, so if you're into feet, this may be the figure for you. As with Lulumu, BearPanda's sculpt is very good, but also like Lulumu, their execution can be poor. The hair is typical of this scale. I don't see any pieces added back in, and they hit the seam of the bangs in the bunny ears, which are not removable. For the face, as I mentioned earlier, I do think the follow me eyes work here. They look less recessed into her head than Lulumu, and the gloss covering gives them more life. Her mouth is extremely detailed and has a lot of depth. The clothing is realistic, and they did a good job with adding wrinkles where her wrists, elbows, and hips are. It does look like a latex or leather bunny suit. It's just a shame that you can't free the girls because this piece is glued down here. On Lulumu, we have glue all over the place, and on Konata, we have one large glob here. I do wish they would have made the belly button more pronounced like in the artwork and like we see on Lulumu. The base is your basic, ugly plastic base that she's permanently attached to. It's at least glossy black, and it came pre-scratched for us. Fantastic. We can see the reason why she's so wobbly, and that's because underneath there is no support structure, which is definitely something they need to address in their upcoming 1/4 scale figures. This figure is from an artwork, which you can see here. This doesn't actually happen in the manga. This is from a standalone illustration by the artist, but it is drawn from the perspective that she's posing for him while he's still captive. This outfit is in the dojin, and in typical Chinese fashion, BearPanda has censored it slightly. In the artwork, you'll see there's a zipper on her neck and under her belly button that goes all the way around for easy access. On BearPanda's figure, there's just a line here, and under her belly button, no zipper. Other than that, it's very faithful to the artwork, honestly, to an annoying degree. I bet you didn't notice, but she has enormous titties. And it's such a shame because at the beginning of the manga, she has normal size. And then as the author gets closer and closer to the end, they get bigger and bigger until they get to this. And then even bigger that matches the dojin, which matches the current big boob trend that we're seeing everywhere nowadays. And I'm gonna need you to do better, Japan, because it's overplayed and you're ruining so many great characters and figures. The pose is constrained by the artwork, but it is just your basic strike a pose in a bunny suit. Although given the context that she's posing for him as inspiration to get over his writer's block while he's captive, does make it a lot more endearing. And let's be honest, I'd let her kidnap me and force me to draw her. So with that, let's give her a score. Starting with the box, we see again similar design language. I do think it's unique for a bunny figure, especially with the slipcover, so it gets a 4 out of 5. Moving on to production, starting with the paint. In many respects, it's almost freeing quality, but let's be real, that's not the compliment it sounds like. In particular, she's held back by the lack of finish on her skin and the dye stain, so she gets a 5 out of 15. For modeling, she has a good sculpt, but it's held back by the execution. In particular, the glue bubble, the fitment of her mask, her belly button could have been more defined, and she's missing her zippers, so she gets a 6 out of 15. The base is at least gloss black, which could have been worth 2 points, but of course it arrives scuffed, and it's not even flat, and so she wobbles, so it's not even a good base, so it's a 1 out of 10. Moving on to artistry, under Art versus Model, they did a good job of being faithful to her character with the exception of the censorship of her zippers and her increased breast size, but that is true to the dojin, so I'll give her an 8 out of 10. The pose is constrained by the artwork, and it is your average bunny pose, though surprisingly not as stiff as some, so it gets a 5 out of 10. Her face is the strongest part of the figure. It may look weird to some, but it's very faithful to the character, and we get 2 of them, so it gets a 10 out of 10. For Moe, it's your pretty standard bunny affair, but I appreciate the context of the situation, so I find it cuter than average, so I'll give it a 6 out of 10. Moving on to value, objectively this figure costs 9,900 yen and weighs 969 grams, giving it a price per gram of 10.22, making it one of the highest value figures we've ever measured, and gets a 5 out of 5. Subjectively, I want to be upset because I had high hopes for this figure, but at the end of the day, it's a solid 1/4 for 9,900 yen with alternate parts, so it gets a 5 out of 5. For playability and displayability, it takes up your average bunny space, but it has several different configurations, so it gets a 4 out of 5. This brings the total of BearPanda's Konata to a 59 out of 100. This puts Konata in 16th place, which is significantly lower than Lulumu, which finished in 6th place. Now that they're here side by side, I think you can see that you get a lot more for the 7,000 yen of Lulumu versus the 10,000 yen of Konata. But real fast, I gotta rant right quick because I see this all the time on Reddit when people ask others why they like 1/4 scales. Inevitably, a bunch of people respond that 1/4 scales have better quality, more details, and more shading. And that's just not true. I feel like anyone saying that doesn't actually own a 1/4 scale. And we can even see that here within BearPanda. And it's not just because Lulumu's smaller and has finer details. There's way more going on here. She has more elements of shading, a more elaborate base, and a more defined stomach. Most 1/4s feel like they're just blown up 1/6, and they never take advantage of the added surface area. Say you like 1/4 scale figures because you like bigger figures, or bunny outfits, or hell, bigger titties, but not because they're more detailed or better quality. But with that, let's get back to BearPanda. So the question is, are they good? Are they worth being excited for? As of right now, we have the 2 figures they're solely responsible for, as well as a bunch on pre-order. So let's take a moment to do a comparison between BearPanda and an equivalent figure from another manufacturer. Here we have the Bishop's Rondo 1/6 scale Lulumu, and this is the limited edition with the transparent nightgown, but it's still the same price as the original at 15,800 yen, and was released in October 2020. Adjusted for inflation, this is roughly 17,400 yen. Even at a distance, I think you can agree that the BearPanda really stands out, especially in the hair. And even adjusted for inflation, the Bishop's Rondo is almost 10,000 yen more expensive. But to give credit to Bishop's Rondo, it is cast off. Now they're both 1/6 scales, but the Bishop's Rondo does feel a tad larger, as noted by the size of their heads. But I can tell you, if they were both 12,000 yen, I would pick the BearPanda because it feels more refined in every way, from modeling to paint quality to the color palette accuracy. I feel there's more value in the BearPanda. For comparison to Konata, we will be using Erina Nakari, manufactured by Fring, because she feels similar. Now, Erina was released in July 2020, got crazy expensive on the aftermarket, and is now being re-released for 29,700 yen. For comparison, both Konata and Erina have shading on their hair. Konata gets bonus points for having no hair pieces added back in, unlike Erina. Meanwhile, Erina gets bonus points for having that soft matte finish on her skin, and the gloss finish of her bunny suit is cleaner, and she has no dye stains. Erina's base is less substantial, and it's an ugly white. But at least it's flat. Meanwhile, Konata's is more substantial, but is not flat and very wobbly. But here's the thing, they both stand beside each other well, and Konata is 1/3 the price of Erina, and honestly feels much closer to the price that Fring should be charging us for their bunnies. As a whole for now, BearPanda is standing its own against more expensive figure companies. In summary, our thoughts on BearPanda are, starting with the pros, they have an excellent sculpt, and currently the value proposition is significantly better than the competition. Cons, the quality control is not up to par with the competition. I can honestly say we're still very excited for our BearPanda pre-orders and for the outlook of this company. And as of right now, we'll still continue to collect their figures. Our hope for BearPanda is that their value proposition will remain strong and that they can fine-tune their quality. Because as soon as they're able to do that, they will be considered very strong contenders in the Japanese market, if not already considered one. I know these rankings sound harsh, especially for Konata, but I truly feel this is how the quality is at the moment, and the value proposition is what really keeps our expectations in line. But I can still recommend you order BearPanda figures. I think you'll be really pleased with the price, as are we. So keep it up, BearPanda. I hope you take Fring down a peg or two, and no matter how you look at it, Lulumu is really an impressive figure. Well, that's it for today's video. If you like this kind of content, please subscribe. You can find a way of supporting the channel in the description below. Well, until next time, senpai, bye!